Welcome back to the channel. Originally going into this story, I thought I was going to be talking about a pirate from central Pennsylvania, one of the few female pirates that are documented, a little after the Golden Age, but still an interesting story. Rather disappointing for myself and probably some of my viewers. That is sadly not what I found when I started digging. Rachel Wall was born Rachel Schmidt in 1760 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Carlisle, by this point, the area had been settled at least as early as the 1720s. In 1734, one of the first structures in the area was a log meeting house. It was for the Presbyterians. It was built at Meeting House Springs. The building is not at the site anymore, but the cemetery remains. It's about 2 miles from the center of Carlisle, or about a mile from Dickinson College. In 1751, Scotch-Irish immigrants officially founded Carlisle. It was named after Carlisle, England. And one of the first structures built was the Carlisle Jail. It was built in 1754 and enlarged in 1790 and then rebuilt in 1854. It was built to be a replica of the castle. If you squint, it kind of looks like it. That building is still there today. It is no longer a functioning jail. It was active up until about the 1960s or so. Afterward, prison operations would move over to Cumberland County Prison. In 1755, during the 7 Years' War, the Carlisle Fort would be built. I've also seen it referenced as Fort Lowther. There's some question over whether or not it's a misprint or not. It would have been part of the same line of forts to include Fort Loudon and Fort Indiantown Gap. Although the fort itself is gone, it still technically remains as the Carlisle Barracks, which is an active military post. It contains the Army War College. It also contains the museum I've done several shorts at. The first public building in Carlisle was the First Presbyterian Church, built in 1757. Rachel Wall claimed that her family were very devout Presbyterians. It is quite likely she and her family attended this church. The documents tend to agree on this. Most of the writers tend to agree on this. This is where the story starts to deviate. Around the time she was 16, it said she got attacked by several people while she was walking along the waterfront, and that's how she met George Wall. Several authors imply that it's the Carlisle waterfront. The largest body of water in Carlisle is the Connedaguinet Creek. The Connedaguinet is tiny. You can probably get a canoe up the creek, but there isn't exactly a waterfront. Most of the supplies that would have had to have been brought into Carlisle would have been coming by wagon. So there's no waterfront in Carlisle. Another story has that her grandfather died and they went to Harrisburg. Now, Harrisburg at this point did have technically a waterfront. There was a ferry operated by John Harris Sr. He had first moved to the area in 1719. Harrisburg was settled largely by Scotch-Irish immigrants. Native Americans had lived on the site for at least 3,000 years. If you go to City Island, the parking lot nearest to the baseball field actually has a Susquehannock village underneath it. When I was a child, my elementary school took a trip there. We actually got to see the archaeological dig. It was actually the first time I saw an archaeological dig, and yeah, it kind of left a mark on me. Likely she would have seen one of the first stone buildings built in the area. It was the John Harris Mansion, which had been built in 1766. Again, this is a structure that still stands today, right along the riverfront in Harrisburg. The Susquehanna River at Harrisburg would not have been deep enough for an actual port. There would have been the ferry. More than likely, there would have been smaller canoes coming up the river, but it was not where you would find sailors. Another theory is that her family had taken a trip to one of the cities, whether it be Philly, New York, or Boston, and that's where she encountered George Wall. At any rate, around the time she was 16, she meets George Wall. She runs off with him for 2 years, came back to her family, and she seems to have she didn't want to have the farm life anymore. So she ends up running off with George Wall again. They moved first to Philadelphia, then to New York, and then to Boston. Rachel found work as a maid, and George Wall supposedly, because sadly I have not found any clear documentation, became involved in a maritime job of some sort. Some say he was a privateer or a smuggler during the American Revolution. We don't know. It's at this point that the stories completely fly off course from the historical documents. Edward Rose Snow, in the 1950s, he was a storyteller and a historian. He did a lot of work with New England history. He is where we first find Rachel Wall as a pirate. Supposedly in 1781, her and her husband took a fishing schooner named the Essex, and they started attacking ships on the New England coast. Supposedly they took 12 ships and killed 24 sailors. Rachel Wall would supposedly stand on the deck of the Essex and pretend that the ship was sinking, and when other boats would come over to help, they'd rob them. There's no documentation this ever happened. And supposedly in 1782, they wrecked the ship, Rachel went back to being a maid, and George Wall ran off to find another ship, and she just became a thief. Again, there is absolutely no documentation that this ever happened. Snow references the papers of Robert Treat Paine. He was the Attorney General of Massachusetts at the time. He doesn't cite which paper, nothing. People who have looked at the papers, they have only been able to find Rachel Wall listed as just a common thief. Also sometimes references Joseph Otis. He was the deputy jailer of Boston. He compiled lists of inmates that were held. Rachel Wall does appear. Rachel Wall also appears with her aliases. One of them was Fanny Jennings. Again, there is no reference to her being a pirate. We do find that there were at least 2 people on the list referenced as pirates, but they were not Rachel Wall. In the description, I'm also going to include a link to Pirate in a Petticoat, The Legend of Rachel Wall by Amy Berkeley. Amy Berkeley does an excellent job of breaking down what she's been able to find. And quite frankly, most of what she's been able to find is about what I've been able to find as well, which there's actually a good bit. There's the jail records, the court records, you find newspapers, there's a wealth of information. None of it includes Rachel Wall being a pirate. Rachel Wall was arrested for stealing from Perez Morton, a friend of John Adams. She was also arrested for stealing from Lemuel Ludden. Now, in these cases, she was breaking into their houses and stealing. Massachusetts at this time still would hang you for robbery, but it was something like pretty much a 3 strikes and you're completely out rule. Robbery without a weapon would stop being a capital offense 6 years later. But in March 18th, 1789, when she was arrested the third time for stealing a bonnet worth 5 shillings from a Margaret Bender. She stole her bonnet and her shoes and then ran off. Several witnesses managed to catch her. Her attorneys during the trial, Christopher Gore and James Hughes, would say, well, since the bonnet wasn't on her person, this was only attempted robbery. The jury would find her guilty of highway robbery. During her... Now, this is another moment where a lot gets added into her story. I've seen several videos where they claim that she wanted to be executed as a pirate. She wanted that honor. No. No, in fact, she tried to claim that, no, she didn't try to steal from Margaret Bender. In fact, Margaret Bender doesn't even recognize me. I'm not the person who did it. She would claim that she did lesser crimes. At one point, she would confess to a theft that had been allegedly committed by somebody else, Miss Dorothy Horn, who had actually been flogged for it. She would confess to that crime. She would say that she baked tools into bread to try to help her husband escape. Interesting to note, her husband doesn't appear on prison records. Now, this could be either he was never arrested or he had been in jail for less than 6 months. Less than 6 months, he might not have been documented. She said that when her husband left, she had turned to stealing, lying, and Sabbath breaking. At no point does she have any of this interaction of, I was a pirate and I want to be executed as one. No. She was somebody who basically got ditched in Boston by her wayward husband and was doing whatever she could to survive and did not want to meet the gallows. She even admitted that in 1787 she snuck aboard a ship. Now, this is the closest we get to piracy. She snuck aboard a ship belonging to a French captain. She found the captain and the mate sleeping. She reached under the captain's head and stole a black silk handkerchief that contained 30 pounds of gold, crowns, and small change. The ship was docked. She did not go there on a boat. She did not go on there in a mighty ship. No, she literally walked off the pier onto the ship and stole, and then left. Apparently she did this several other times on different ships, but she wasn't a pirate. She was somebody who would walk around the waterfront and try to sneak on to boats. It happens today in port cities. This is not a unique crime. On October 8th, 1789, she and 2 others who were set to be executed would be led to the corner of Boylston Street and Tremont Street, which is documented by the sheriff as being the usual place of execution. Her death warrant was signed by John Hancock. Yes, the John Hancock. And it would be there that she would end her life. Now, was Snow being malicious in telling and making up the story? More than likely not. Could be a chance that he might have misread something and confused her with some of the others that might have been referenced, and that maybe we need to dig deeper into their story. But so far, we cannot find any of the documentation that he claims existed. We have the newspapers, we have the court records. There's no reference to her being a pirate. You could stretch the fact that she robbed from ships, that she was a pirate, but I wouldn't go that far. Now, she could have made the choice of staying behind in Carlisle, and she would likely be buried near a certain Molly Pitcher, the hero of Monmouth, Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay. That's actually where her grave's located. But, alas, she ended up executed in Boston. and has forever been immortalized as a pirate, which was something she never claimed to be. Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, like, share, subscribe. Again, I am sorry, I was hoping for a pirate story, but sadly it turned into a debunking video. I'll include links to source material below. I know some people might be disappointed enough that I have to see. Well, I'll let you see. So, take care. Have an awesome day.